dig me no grave. The thunder of my old-fashioned door knocker, reverberating eerily through the house, roused me from a restless and nightmare-haunted sleep. I looked out the window. In the last light of the sinking moon, the white face of my friend, John Conrad, looked up at me. "May I come up, Kirawan?" His voice was shaky and strained. "Certainly." I sprang out of bed and pulled on a bathrobe as I heard him enter the front door and ascend the stairs. A moment later he stood before me, and in the light which I had turned on I saw his hands tremble and noticed the unnatural pallor of his face. "Old John Grimlan died an hour ago," he said abruptly. Indeed, I had not known that he was ill. It was a sudden, virulent attack of peculiar nature, a sort of seizure somewhat akin to epilepsy. He has been subject to such spells of late years, you know. I nodded. I knew something of the old hermit-like man who had lived in his great dark house on the hill. Indeed, I had once witnessed one of his strange seizures, and I had been appalled at the writhings, howlings, and yammerings of the wretch, who had groveled on the earth like a wounded snake, gibbering terrible curses and black blasphemies, until his voice broke in a wordless screaming which spattered his lips with foam. Seeing this, I understood why people in old times looked on such victims as men possessed by demons. "Some hereditary taint," Conrad was saying. "Old John doubtless fell heir to some ingrown weakness brought on by some loathsome disease, which was his heritage from perhaps a remote ancestor. Such things occasionally happen, or else, well, you know old John himself pried about in the mysterious parts of the earth, and wandered all over the East in his younger days. It is quite possible that he was infected with some obscure malady in his wanderings. There are still many unclassified diseases in Africa and the Orient." "But," said I, "you have not told me the reason for this sudden visit at this unearthly hour, for I notice that it is past midnight." My friend seemed rather confused. "Well, the fact is that John Grimlan died alone, except for myself. He refused to receive any medical aid of any sort, and in the last few moments, when it was evident that he was dying, and I was prepared to go for some sort of help in spite of him, he set up such a howling and screaming that I could not refuse his passionate pleas, which were that he should not be left to die alone. I have seen men die," added Conrad, wiping the perspiration from his pale brow, "but the death of John Grimlan was the most fearful thing I have ever seen." "He suffered a great deal?" "He appeared to be in much physical agony, but this was mostly submerged by some monstrous mental or psychic suffering. The fear in his distended eyes and his screams transcended any conceivable earthly terror. I tell you, Kirawan, Grimlan's fright was greater and deeper than the ordinary fear of the beyond shown by a man of ordinarily evil life." I shifted restlessly. The dark implications of this statement sent a chill of nameless apprehension trickling down my spine. "I know the country people always claim that in his youth he sold his soul to the devil, and that his sudden epileptic attacks were merely a visible sign of the fiend's power over him. But such talk is foolish, of course, and belongs in the Dark Ages. We all know that John Grimlan's life was a peculiarly evil and vicious one, even toward his last days. With good reason he was universally detested and feared, for I never heard of his doing a single good act. You were his only friend." "And that was a strange friendship," said Conrad. "I was attracted to him by his unusual powers, for despite his bestial nature, John Grimlan was a highly educated man, a deeply cultured man. He had dipped deep into occult studies, and I first met him in this manner, for, as you know, I have always been strongly interested in these lines of research myself. But in this, as in all other things, Grimlan was evil and perverse. He had ignored the white side of the occult and delved into the darker, grimmer phases of it, into devil worship and voodoo and Shintoism. His knowledge of these foul arts and sciences was immense and unholy, and to hear him tell of his researches and experiments was to know such horror and repulsion as a venomous reptile might inspire, for there had been no depths to which he had not sunk, and some things he only hinted at, even to me. I tell you, Kirawan, it is easy to laugh at the tales of the black world of the unknown, when one is in pleasant company under the bright sunlight. But had you sat at ungodly hours in the silent, bizarre library of John Grimlan, and looked on the ancient, musty volumes and listened to his grisly talk as I did, your tongue would have cloven to your palate with sheer horror as mine did, and the supernatural would have seemed very real and near to you, as it seemed to me. But in God's name, man, I cried, for the tension was growing unbearable. Come to the point and tell me what you want of me. I want you to come with me to John Grimlan's house and help carry out his outlandish instructions in regard to his body. I had no liking for the adventure, but I dressed hurriedly, an occasional shudder of premonition shaking me. Once fully clad, I followed Conrad out of the house and up the silent road which led to the house of John Grimlan. The road wound uphill, and all the way, looking upward and forward, I could see that great grim house perched like a bird of evil on the crest of the hill, bulking black and stark against the stars. In the west pulsed a single dull red smear where the young moon had just sunk from view behind the low black hills. The whole night seemed full of brooding evil, and the persistent swishing of a bat's wings somewhere overhead caused my taut nerves to jerk and thrum. To drown the quick pounding of my own heart, I said, "Do you share the belief so many hold, that John Grimlan was mad?" We strode on several paces before Conrad answered, seemingly with a strange reluctance. "But for one incident, I would say no man was ever saner. But one night in his study he seemed suddenly to break all bonds of reason. He had discoursed for hours on his favorite subject, black magic, when suddenly he cried as his face lit with a weird, unholy glow, 'Why should I sit here babbling such child's prattle to you? These voodoo rituals, these Shinto sacrifices, feathered snakes, goats without horns, black leopard cults, bah! Filth and dust that wind blows away, dregs of the real unknown, the deep mysteries, mere echoes from the abyss. I could tell you things that would shatter your paltry brain. I could breathe into your ear names that would wither you like a burnt weed. What do you know of Yog-Sothoth or Cthulhu's and the sunken cities? None of these names is even included in your mythologies. Not even in your dreams have you glimpsed the black cyclopean walls of Koth, or shriveled before the noxious winds that blow from Yuggoth. But I will not blast you lifeless with my black wisdom. I cannot expect your infantile brain to bear what mine holds. Were you as old as I, had you seen, as I have seen, kingdoms crumble and generations pass away, had you gathered as ripe grain the dark secrets of the centuries? He was raving away, his wildly lit face scarcely human in appearance, and suddenly, noting my evident bewilderment, he burst into a horrible, cackling laugh. "Gad!" he cried in a voice and accent strange to me. "Methinks I've frightened ye, and certes it is not to be marvelled at, sith ye be but a naked savage in the arts of life after all. Ye think I be old, eh? Why, ye gaping lout, ye'd drop dead were I to divulge the generations of men I've known." But at this point such horror overcame me that I fled from his house as from an adder, and his high-pitched, diabolical laughter followed me out of the shadowy house. Some days later I received a letter apologizing for his manner and ascribing it candidly, too candidly, to drugs. I did not believe it, but I renewed our relations after some hesitation. "It sounds like utter madness," I muttered. "Yes," admitted Conrad hesitantly, "but, Kirawan, have you ever seen anyone who knew John Grimlan in his youth?" I shook my head. "I have been at pains to inquire about him discreetly," said Conrad. "He has lived here, with the exception of mysterious absences often for months at a time, for 20 years. The older villagers remember distinctly when he first came and took over that old house on the hill, and they all say that in the intervening years he seemed not to have aged perceptibly. When he came here he looked just about as he does now, or did up to the moment of his death, of the appearance of a man about 50. I met old von Boenck in Vienna, who said he knew Grimlan when a very young man studying in Berlin 50 years ago. And he expressed astonishment that the old man was still living, for he said at the time Grimlan seemed to be about 50 years of age. I gave an incredulous exclamation, seeing the implication toward which the conversation was trending. Nonsense! Professor von Bonk is past 80 himself and liable to the errors of extreme age. He confused this man with another. Yet as I spoke, my flesh crawled unpleasantly, and the hairs on my neck prickled. Well, shrugged Conrad, here we are at the house. The huge pile reared up menacingly before us, and as we reached the front door a vagrant wind moaned through the nearby trees, and I started foolishly as I again heard the ghostly beat of the bat's wings. Conrad turned a large key in the antique lock, and as we entered, a cold draught swept across us like a breath from the grave, moldy and cold. I shuddered. We groped our way through a black hallway and into a study, and here Conrad lighted a candle, for no gas lights or electric lights were to be found in the house. I looked about me, dreading what the light might disclose, but the room, heavily tapestried and bizarrely furnished, was empty, save for us two. Where is it? I asked in a husky whisper from a throat gone dry. Upstairs, answered Conrad in a low voice, showing that the silence and the mystery of the house had laid a spell on him also. Upstairs in the library, where he died. I glanced up involuntarily. Somewhere above our head, the lone master of this grim house was stretched out in his last sleep, silent, his white face set in a grinning mask of death. Panic swept over me, and I fought for control. After all, it was merely the corpse of a wicked old man who was past harming anyone. This argument rang hollowly in my brain like the words of a frightened child who was trying to reassure himself. I turned to Conrad. He had taken a time-yellowed envelope from an inside pocket. This, he said, removing from the envelope several pages of closely written, time-yellowed parchment, is, in effect, the last word of John Grimlan, though God alone knows how many years ago it was written. He gave it to me 10 years ago, immediately after his return from Mongolia. It was shortly after this that he had his first seizure. This envelope he gave me sealed, and he made me swear that I would hide it carefully and that I would not open it until he was dead, when I was to read the contents and follow their directions exactly. More, he made me swear that no matter what he said or did after giving me the envelope, I would go ahead as first directed. For, he said with a fearful smile, the flesh is weak, but I am a man of my word, and though I might, in a moment of weakness, wish to retract, it is far, far too late now. You may never understand the matter, but you are to do as I have said. Well, again Conrad wiped his brow. Tonight, as he lay writhing in his death agonies, his wordless howls were mingled with frantic admonitions to me to bring him the envelope and destroy it before his eyes. As he yammered this, he forced himself up on his elbows, and with eyes starting and hair standing straight up on his head, he screamed at me in a manner to chill the blood, and he was shrieking for me to destroy the envelope, not to open it. And once he howled in his delirium for me to hew his body into pieces and scatter the bits to the four winds of heaven. An uncontrollable exclamation of horror escaped my dry lips. At last, went on Conrad, I gave in. Remembering his commands 10 years ago, I at first stood firm, but at last, as his screeches grew unbearably desperate, I turned to go for the envelope, even though that meant leaving him alone. But as I turned, with one last fearful convulsion in which blood-flecked foam flew from his writhing lips, the life went from his twisted body in a single great wrench. He fumbled at the parchment. I am going to carry out my promise. The directions herein seem fantastic, and may be the whims of a disordered mind, but I gave my word. They are, briefly, that I place his corpse on the great black ebony table in his library, with 7 black candles burning about him. The doors and windows are to be firmly closed and fastened. Then, in the darkness which precedes dawn, I am to read the formula, charm, or spell which is contained in a smaller, sealed envelope inside the first, and which I have not yet opened. But is that all? I cried. No provisions as to the disposition of his fortune, his estate, or his corpse? Nothing. In his will, which I have seen elsewhere, he leaves estate and fortune to a certain Oriental gentleman named in the document as Malik Tooze. What? I cried, shaken to my soul. Conrad, this is madness heaped on madness. Malik Tooze! Good God, no mortal man was ever so named. That is the title of the foul god worshipped by the mysterious Yazidis, they of Mount Alamount, the accursed, whose 8 brazen towers rise in the mysterious wastes of deep Asia. His idolatrous symbol is the brazen peacock, and the Muhammadans, who hate his demon-worshipping devotees, say he is the essence of evil of all the universes. The Prince of Darkness, Ahriman, the old serpent, the veritable Satan, and you say Grimlan names this mythical demon in his will? It is the truth. Conrad's throat was dry. And look, he has scribbled a strange line at the corner of this parchment. Dig me no grave. I shall not need one. Again a chill wandered down my spine. In God's name, I cried in a kind of frenzy, let us get this incredible business over with. I think a drink might help, answered Conrad, moistening his lips. It seems to me I've seen Grimlan go into this cabinet for wine. He bent to the door of an ornately carved mahogany cabinet, and after some difficulty opened it. No wine here, he said disappointedly. And if ever I felt the need of stimulants, what's this? He drew out a roll of parchment, dusty, yellowed, and half covered with spiderwebs. Everything in that grim house seemed, to my nervously excited senses, fraught with mysterious meaning and import, and I leaned over his shoulder as he unrolled it. It is a record of peerage, he said. Such a chronicle of births, deaths, and so forth as the old families used to keep, in the 16th century and earlier. What's the name? I asked. He scowled over the dim scrawl, striving to master the faded, archaic script. Grym. I've got it. Grimlan, of course. It is the records of old John's family, the Grimlans of Toad's Heath Manor, Suffolk. What an outlandish name for an estate. Look at the last entry. Together we read, John Grimlan, born March 10th, 1630. And then we both cried out. Under this entry was freshly written in a strange, scrawling hand, died March 10th, 1930. Below this there was a seal of black wax, stamped with a strange design, something like a peacock with a spreading tail. Conrad stared at me speechless, all the color ebbed from his face. I shook myself with the rage engendered by fear. It's the hoax of a madman, I shouted. The stage has been set with such great care that the actors have overstepped themselves. Whoever they are, they have heaped up so many incredible effects as to nullify them. It is all a very stupid, very dull drama of illusion. And even as I spoke, icy sweat stood out on my body, and I shook as with an ague. With a wordless motion, Conrad turned toward the stairs, taking up a large candle from a mahogany table. It was understood, I suppose, he whispered, that I should go through with this ghastly matter alone. But I had not the moral courage, and now I'm glad I had not. A still horror brooded over the silent house as we went up the stairs. A faint breeze stole in from somewhere and set the heavy velvet hangings rustling, and I visualized stealthy taloned fingers drawing aside the tapestries to fix red gloating eyes upon us. Once I thought I heard the indistinct clumping of monstrous feet somewhere above us, but it must have been the heavy pounding of my own heart. The stairs debouched into a wide, dark corridor, in which our feeble candle cast a faint gleam which but illuminated our pale faces and made the shadows seem darker by comparison. We stopped at a heavy door, and I heard Conrad's breath draw in sharply, as a man's will when he braces himself physically or mentally. I involuntarily clenched my fists until the nails bit into the palms. Then Conrad thrust the door open. A sharp cry escaped his lips. The candle dropped from his nerveless fingers and went out. The library of John Grimlan was ablaze with light, though the whole house had been in darkness when we entered it. This light came from 7 black candles placed at regular intervals about the great ebony table. On this table, between the candles, I had braced myself against the sight. Now, in the face of the mysterious illumination and the sight of the thing on the table, my resolution nearly gave way. John Grimlan had been unlovely in life. In death, he was hideous. Yes, he was hideous, even though his face was mercifully covered with this same curious silken robe which, worked in fantastic, bird-like designs, covered his whole body except the crooked, claw-like hands and the bare, withered feet. A strangling sound came from Conrad. "My God," he whispered. "What is this?" I laid his body out on the table and placed the candles about it, but I did not light them, nor did I place that robe over the body. And there were bedroom slippers on his feet when I left. He halted suddenly. We were not alone in the death room. At first we had not seen him, as he sat in the great armchair in a farther nook of a corner, so still that he seemed part of the shadows cast by the heavy tapestries. As my eyes fell upon him, a violent shuddering shook me, and a feeling akin to nausea racked the pit of my stomach. My first impression was of vivid, oblique yellow eyes which gazed unwinkingly at us. The man rose and made a deep salaam, and we saw that he was an Oriental. Now when I strive to etch him clearly in my mind, I can resurrect no plain image of him. I only remember those piercing eyes and the yellow, fantastic robe he wore. We returned his salute mechanically, and he spoke in a low, refined voice. "Gentlemen, I crave your pardon. I have made so free as to light the candles. Shall we not proceed with the business pertaining to our mutual friend?" He made a slight gesture toward the silent bulk on the table. Conrad nodded, evidently unable to speak. The thought flashed through our minds at the same time, that this man had also been given a sealed envelope. But how had he come to the Grimlan house so quickly? John Grimlan had been dead scarcely 2 hours, and to the best of our knowledge no one knew of his demise but ourselves. And how had he gotten into the locked and bolted house? The whole affair was grotesque and unreal in the extreme. We did not even introduce ourselves or ask the stranger his name. He took charge in a matter-of-fact way, and so under the spell of horror and illusion were we that we moved dazedly, involuntarily obeying his suggestions, given us in a low, respectful tone. I found myself standing on the left side of the table, looking across its grisly burden at Conrad. The Oriental stood with arms folded and head bowed at the head of the table. Nor did it then strike me as being strange that he should stand there instead of Conrad, who was to read what Grimlan had written. I found my gaze drawn to the figure worked on the breast of the stranger's robe, in black silk, a curious figure, somewhat resembling a peacock and somewhat resembling a bat or a flying dragon. I noted with a start that the same design was worked on the robe covering the corpse. The doors had been locked, the windows fastened down. Conrad, with a shaky hand, opened the inner envelope and fluttered open the parchment sheets contained therein. These sheets seemed much older than those containing the instructions to Conrad in the larger envelope. Conrad began to read in a monotonous drone, which had the effect of hypnosis on the hearer. So at times the candles grew dim in my gaze, and the room and its occupants swam strange and monstrous, veiled and distorted like an hallucination. Most of what he read was gibberish. It meant nothing. Yet the sound of it and the archaic style of it filled me with an intolerable horror. "To ye contract, elsewhere recorded, I, John Grimlan, hereby swear by ye name of ye nameless one to keep good faith. Wherefore do I now write in blood these words spoken to me in this grim and silent chamber in ye dead city of Koth, whereto no mortal man hath attained but me. These same words now writ down by me to be read over my body at ye appointed time to fulfill my part of ye bargain, which I entered into of mine own free will and knowledge, being of right mind and 50 years of age, this year of 1680 A.D. Here beginneth ye incantation. Before man was, ye elder ones were, and even yet their Lord dwelleth among ye shadows, to which if a man set his foot, he may not turn upon his track. The words merged into a barbaric gibberish as Conrad stumbled through an unfamiliar language. A language faintly suggesting the Phoenician, but shuddery with the touch of a hideous antiquity beyond any remembered earthly tongue. One of the candles flickered and went out. I made a move to relight it, but emotion from the silent Oriental stayed me. His eyes burned into mine, then shifted back to the still form on the table. The manuscript had shifted back into its archaic English. "And ye mortal, which gaineth to ye black citadels of Koth, and speaks with ye dark lord whose face is hidden, for a price may he gain his heart's desire, riches and knowledge beyond counting, and life beyond mortal span even 250 years. Again Conrad's voice trailed off into unfamiliar gutturals. Another candle went out. "Let not ye mortal flinch as ye time draweth nigh for payment. And ye fires of hell lay hold upon ye vitals as the sign of reckoning. For ye prince of darkness taketh his due in ye end, and he is not to be cozened. What ye have promised, that shall ye deliver. Algantha na shuba." At the first sound of those barbaric accents, a cold hand of terror locked about my throat. My frantic eyes shot to the candles, and I was not surprised to see another flicker out. Yet there was no hint of any draught to stir the heavy black hangings. Conrad's voice wavered. He drew his hand across his throat, gagging momentarily. The eyes of the Oriental never altered. "Among ye sons of men glide strange shadows forever. Men see ye tracks of ye talons, but not ye feet that make them. Over ye souls of men spread great black wings. There is but one black master, though men call him Satanas, and Beelzebub, and Apollyon, and Aramon, and Malik-Tus." Mists of horror engulfed me. I was dimly aware of Conrad's voice droning on, both in English and in that other fearsome tongue whose horrific import I scarcely dared try to guess. And with stark fear clutching at my heart, I saw the candles go out, one by one. And with each flicker, as the gathering gloom darkened about us, my horror mounted. I could not speak. I could not move. My distended eyes were fixed with agonized intensity on the remaining candle. The silent Oriental at the head of that ghastly table was included in my fear. He had not moved nor spoken, but under his drooping lids his eyes burned with devilish triumph. I knew that beneath his inscrutable exterior he was gloating fiendishly. But why? Why? But I knew that the moment the extinguishing of the last candle plunged the room into utter darkness, some nameless, abominable thing would take place. Conrad was approaching the end. His voice rose to the climax in gathering crescendo. "Approacheth now ye moment of payment. Ye ravens are flying, ye bats wing against ye sky. There are skulls in ye stars. Ye soul and ye body are promised, and shall be delivered up, not to ye dust again, nor ye elements from which spring life." The candle flickered slightly. I tried to scream, but my mouth gaped to a soundless yammering. I tried to flee, but I stood frozen, unable to even close my eyes. "Ye abyss yawns, and ye debt is to pay. Ye light fails, ye shadows gather. There is no God but evil, no light but darkness, no hope but doom." A hollow groan resounded through the room. It seemed to come from the robe-covered thing on the table. The robe twitched fitfully. "O wings in ye black dark!" I started violently. A faint swish sounded in the gathering shadows. The stir of the dark hangings? It sounded like the rustle of gigantic wings. "O red eyes in ye shadows! What is promised, what is writ in blood is fulfilled. Ye light is gulfed in blackness. Yea, Koth!" The last candle went out suddenly, and a ghastly, unhuman cry that came not from my lips or from Conrad's burst unbearably forth. Horror swept over me like a black, icy wave. In the blind dark I heard myself screaming terribly. Then with a swirl and a great rush of wind, something swept the room, flinging the hangings aloft, and dashing chairs and tables crashing to the floor. For an instant, an intolerable odor burned our nostrils. A low, hideous tittering mocked us in the blackness. Then silence fell like a shroud. Somehow, Conrad found a candle and lighted it. The faint glow showed us the room in fearful disarray, showed us each other's ghastly faces, and showed us the black ebony table. Empty. The doors and windows were locked, as they had been, but the Oriental was gone, and so was the corpse of John Grimlan. Shrieking like damned men, we broke down the door and fled frenziedly down the well-like staircase, where the darkness seemed to clutch at us with clammy black fingers. As we tumbled down into the lower hallway, a lurid glow cut the darkness, and the scent of burning wood filled our nostrils. The outer doorway held momentarily against our frantic assault, then gave way, and we hurtled into the outer starlight. Behind us, the flames leaped up with a crackling roar as we fled down the hill. Conrad, glancing over his shoulder, halted suddenly, wheeled and flung up his arms like a madman, and screamed, "Soul and body he sold to Malik Tus, who is Satan, 250 years ago. This was the night of payment, and my God, look, look! The fiend has claimed his own." I looked, frozen with horror. Flames had enveloped the whole house with appalling swiftness, and now the great mass was etched against the shadowed sky, a crimson inferno, and above the holocaust hovered a gigantic black shadow, like a monstrous bat, and from its dark clutch dangled a small white thing, like the body of a man, dangling limply. Then, even as we cried out in horror, it was gone, and our dazed gaze met only the shuddering walls and blazing roof, which crumpled into the flames with an earth-shaking roar. The end. Rattle of Bones. "Landlord, ho!" The shout broke the lowering silence and reverberated through the black forest with sinister echoing. "This place hath a forbidding aspect, meseemeth." Two men stood in front of the forest tavern. The building was low, long, and rambling, built of heavy logs. Its small windows were heavily barred and the door was closed. Above the door its sinister sign showed faintly, a cleft skull. This door swung slowly open and a bearded man peered out. The owner of the face stepped back and motioned his guests to enter, with a grudging gesture it seemed. A candle gleamed on a table. A flame smoldered in the fireplace. "Your names?" "Solomon Kane," said the taller man briefly. "Gaston Leamon," the other spoke curtly. "But what is that to you?" "Strangers are few in the Black Forest," grunted the host. "Bandits many. Sit at yonder table and I will bring food." The two men sat down with the bearing of men who have traveled far. One was a tall, gaunt man, clad in a featherless hat and somber black garments, which set off the dark pallor of his forbidding face. The other was of a different type entirely, bedecked with lace and plumes, although his finery was somewhat stained from travel. He was handsome in a bold way, and his restless eyes shifted from side to side, never still an instant. The host brought wine and food to the rough-hewn table, and then stood back in the shadows like a somber image. His features, now receding into vagueness, now luridly etched in the firelight as it leaped and flickered, were masked in a beard which seemed almost animal-like in thickness. A great nose curved above this beard, and two small red eyes stared unblinkingly at his guests. "Who are you?" suddenly asked the younger man. "I am the host of the Cleft Skull Tavern," sullenly replied the other. His tone seemed to challenge his questioner to ask further. "Do you have many guests?" Learmon pursued. "Few come twice," the host grunted. Kane started and glanced up straight into those small red eyes, as if he sought for some hidden meaning in the host's words. The flaming eyes seemed to dilate, then dropped sullenly before the Englishman's cold stare. "I'm for bed," said Kane abruptly, bringing his meal to a close. "I must take up my journey by daylight." "And I," added the Frenchman. Host, show us to our chambers. Black shadows wavered on the walls as the two followed their silent host down a long, dark hall. The stocky, broad body of their guide seemed to grow and expand in the light of the small candle which he carried, throwing a long, grim shadow behind him. At a certain door he halted, indicating that they were to sleep there. They entered. The host lit a candle with the one he carried, then lurched back the way he had come. In the chamber the two men glanced at each other. The only furnishings of the room were a couple of bunks, a chair or two, and a heavy table. "Let us see if there be any way to make fast the door," said Kane. "I like not the looks of mine host." "There are racks on the door and a jamb for a bar," said Gaston. "But no bar." "We might break up the table and use its pieces for a bar," mused Kane. "Mon Dieu," said Learmont, "you are timorous, monsieur." Kane scowled. "I like not being murdered in my sleep," he answered gruffly. "My faith," the Frenchman laughed. "We are chance met. Until I overtook you on the forest road an hour before sunset, we had never seen each other." "I have seen you somewhere before," answered Kane, "though I cannot now recall where. As for the other, I assume every man is an honest fellow until he shows me he is a rogue. Moreover, I am a light sleeper and slumber with a pistol at hand." The Frenchman laughed again. "I was wondering how monsieur could bring himself to sleep in the room with the stranger. All right, monsieur Englishman, let us go forth and take a bar from one of the other rooms." Taking the candle with them, they went into the corridor. Utter silence reigned, and the small candle twinkled redly and evilly in the thick darkness. "Mine host hath neither guest nor servants," muttered Solomon Kane. "A strange tavern. What is the name now? These German words come not easily to me. The Cleft Skull? A bloody name, of faith." They tried the rooms next to theirs, but no bar rewarded their search. At last they came to the last room at the end of the corridor. They entered. It was furnished like the rest, except that the door was provided with a small barred opening, and fastened from the outside with a heavy bolt, which was secured at one end to the door jamb. They raised the bolt and looked in. "There should be an outer window, but there is not," muttered Kane. "Look." The floor was stained darkly. The walls and the one bunk were hacked in places, great splinters having been torn away. "Men have died in here," said Kane somberly. "Is yonder not a bar fixed in the wall?" "Aye, but 'tis made fast," said the Frenchman, tugging at it. A section of the wall swung back, and Gaston gave a quick exclamation. A small secret room was revealed, and the two men bent over the grisly thing that lay upon its floor. "The skeleton of a man," said Gaston, "and behold how his bony leg is shackled to the floor. He was imprisoned here, and died." "Nay," said Kane. "The skull is cleft. Methinks mine host had a grim reason for the name of his hellish tavern. This man, like us, was no doubt a wanderer who fell into the fiend's hands." "Likely," said Gaston without interest. He was engaged in idly working the great iron ring from the skeleton's leg bones. Failing in this, he drew his sword, and with an exhibition of remarkable strength, cut the chain which joined the ring on the leg to a ring set deep in the log floor. "Why should he shackle a skeleton to the floor?" mused the Frenchman. "Mon bleu, 'tis a waste of good chain. Now, monsieur," he ironically addressed the white heap of bones, "I have freed you, and you may go where you like." "Have done." Kane's voice was deep. "No good will come of mocking the dead." "The dead should defend themselves," laughed Learmont. "Somehow I will slay the man who kills me, though my corpse climb up 40 fathoms of ocean to do it." Kane turned toward the outer door, closing the door of the secret room behind him. He liked not this talk which smacked of demonry and witchcraft, and he was in haste to face the host with the charge of his guilt. As he turned with his back to the Frenchman, he felt the touch of cold steel against his neck, and knew that a pistol muzzle was pressed close beneath the base of his brain. "Move not, monsieur." The voice was low and silky. "Move not, or I will scatter your few brains over the room." The Puritan, raging inwardly, stood with his hands in the air, while Learmont slipped his pistols and sword from their sheaths. "Now you can turn," said Gaston, stepping back. Kane bent a grim eye on the dapper fellow who stood bareheaded now, hat in one hand, the other hand leveling his long pistol. "Gaston the Butcher," said the Englishman somberly. "Fool that I was to trust a Frenchman. You range far, murderer. I remember you now with that cursed great hat off. I saw you in Calais some years agone." "Aye, and now you will see me never again. What was that?" "Rats exploring yon skeleton," said Kane, watching the bandit like a hawk, waiting for a single slight wavering of that black gun muzzle. The sound was of the rattle of bones. "Like enough," returned the other. "Now, Monsieur Kane, I know you carry considerable money on your person. I had thought to wait until you slept and then slay you, but the opportunity presented itself, and I took it. You trick easily." "I had little thought that I should fear a man with whom I had broken bread," said Kane, a deep timbre of slow fury sounding in his voice. The bandit laughed cynically. His eyes narrowed as he began to back slowly toward the outer door. Kane's sinews tensed involuntarily. He gathered himself like a giant wolf about to launch himself in a death leap, but Gaston's hand was like a rock, and the pistol never trembled. "We will have no death plunges after the shot," said Gaston. "Stand still, monsieur. I have seen men killed by dying men, and I wish to have distance enough between us to preclude that possibility. My faith, I will shoot. You will roar and charge, but you will die before you reach me with your bare hands. And mine host will have another skeleton in his secret niche. That is, if I do not kill him myself. The fool knows me not, nor I him, moreover." The Frenchman was in the doorway now, sighting along the barrel. The candle, which had been stuck in a niche on the wall, shed a weird and flickering light which did not extend past the doorway. And with the suddenness of death, from the darkness behind Gaston's back, a broad, vague form rose up, and a gleaming blade swept down. The Frenchman went to his knees like a butchered ox, his brains spilling from his cleft skull. Above him towered the figure of the host, a wild and terrible spectacle, still holding the hanger with which he had slain the bandit. "Ho, ho, ho!" he roared. "Back!" Kane had leaped forward as Gaston fell, but the host thrust into his very face a long pistol which he held in his left hand. "Back!" he repeated in a tigerish roar, and Kane retreated from the menacing weapon and the insanity in the red eyes. The Englishman stood silent, his flesh crawling as he sensed a deeper and more hideous threat than the Frenchman had offered. There was something inhuman about this man, who now swayed to and fro like some great forest beast, while his mirthless laughter boomed out again. "Gaston the Butcher!" kicking the corpse at his feet. "Ho, ho! My fine brigand will hunt no more. I had heard of this fool who roamed the Black Forest. He wished gold, and he found death. Now your gold shall be mine, and more than gold, vengeance." "I am no foe of yours," Kane spoke calmly. "All men are my foes. Look, the marks on my wrist. See the marks on my ankles, and deep in my back, the kiss of the knot, and deep in my brain the wounds of the years of the cold, silent cells where I lay as punishment for a crime I never committed." The voice broke in a hideous, grotesque sob. Kane made no answer. This man was not the first he had seen whose brain had shattered amid the horrors of the terrible continental prisons. "But I escaped!" The scream rose triumphantly. "And here I make war on all men." What was that? Did Kane see a flash of fear in those hideous eyes? "My sorcerer is rattling his bones," whispered the host, then laughed wildly. "Dying, he swore his very bones would weave a net of death for me. I shackled his corpse to the floor, and now, deep in the night, I hear his bare skeleton clash and rattle as he seeks to be free, and I laugh. Ho, ho, ho! How he yearns to rise and stalk like old King Death along these dark corridors when I sleep, to slay me in my bed." Suddenly, the insane eyes flared hideously. "You were in that secret room. You and this dead fool. Did he talk to you?" Kane shuddered in spite of himself. Was it insanity? Or did he actually hear the faint rattle of bones, as if the skeleton had moved slightly? Kane shrugged his shoulders. Rats will even tug at dusty bones. The host was laughing again. He sidled around Kane, keeping the Englishman always covered, and with his free hand opened the door. All was darkness within, so that Kane could not even see the glimmer of the bones on the floor. "All men are my foes," mumbled the host, in the incoherent manner of the insane. "Why should I spare any man who lifted a hand to my aid when I lay for years in the vile dungeons of Karlsruhe, and for a deed never proven? Something happened to my brain then. I became a wolf, a brother to these of the Black Forest, to which I fled when I escaped. They have feasted, my brothers, on all who lay in my tavern, all except this one who now clashes his bones, this magician from Russia. Lest he come stalking back through the black shadows when night is over the world, and slay me, for who may slay the dead? I stripped his bones and shackled him. His sorcery was not powerful enough to save him from me, but all men know that a dead magician is more evil than a living one. Move not, Englishman! Your bones I shall leave in this secret room besides this one too." The maniac was standing partly in the doorway of the secret room now, his weapon still menacing Kane. Suddenly he seemed to topple backward and vanished in the darkness, and at the same instant a vagrant gust of wind swept down the outer corridor and slammed the door shut behind him. The candle on the wall flickered and went out. Kane's groping hands, sweeping over the floor, found a pistol, and he straightened, facing the door where the maniac had vanished. He stood in the utter darkness, his blood freezing, while a hideous, muffled screaming came from the secret room, intermingled with the dry, grisly rattle of fleshless bones. Then silence fell. Kane found flint and steel and lighted the candle. Then, holding it in one hand and the pistol in the other, he opened the secret door. "Great God," he muttered as cold sweat formed on his body. "This thing is beyond all reason, yet with mine own eyes I see it. 2 vows here have been kept. For Gaston the butcher swore that even in death he would avenge his slaying, and his was the hand which set yon fleshless monster free, and he—" The host of the cleft skull lay lifeless on the floor of the secret room, his bestial face set in lines of terrible fear, and deep in his broken neck were sunk the bare finger bones of the sorcerer's skeleton. The end. Gods of the North. The clangor of the swords had died away. The shouting of the slaughter was hushed. Silence lay on the red-stained snow. The pale, bleak sun that glittered so blindingly from the ice fields and the snow-covered plains struck sheens of silver from rent corselet and broken blade, where the dead lay in heaps. The nerveless hand yet gripped the broken hilt. Helmeted heads, back-drawn in the death throes, tilted red beards and golden beards grimly upward, as if in last invocation to Ymir, the frost giant. Across the red drifts and mail-clad forms, 2 figures approached one another. In that utter desolation only they moved. The frosty sky was over them, the white illimitable plain around them, the dead men at their feet. Slowly through the corpses they came, as ghosts might come to a tryst through the shambles of a world. Their shields were gone, their corselets dinted. Blood smeared their mail, their swords were red. Their horned helmets showed the marks of fierce strokes. One spoke, he whose locks and beard were red as the blood on the sunlit snow. "Man of the raven locks," said he, "tell me your name so that my brothers in Vanaheim may know who was the last of Wulfhere's band to fall before the sword of Heimdall." "This is my answer," replied the black-haired warrior. "Not in Vanaheim, but in Valhalla will you tell your brothers the name of Amra of Akbitana." Heimdall roared and sprang, and his sword swung in a mighty arc. Amra staggered, and his vision was filled with red sparks as the blade shivered into bits of blue fire on his helmet. But as he reeled, he thrust with all the power of his great shoulders. The sharp point drove through the brass scales and bones and heart, and the red-haired warrior died at Amra's feet. Amra stood swaying, trailing his sword, a sudden sick weariness assailing him. The glare of the sun on the snow cut his eyes like a knife, and the sky seemed shrunken and strangely far. He turned away from the trampled expanse where yellow-bearded warriors lay locked with red-haired slayers in the embrace of death. A few steps he took, and the glare of the snowfields was suddenly dimmed. A rushing wave of blindness engulfed him, and he sank down into the snow, supporting himself on one mailed arm, seeking to shake the blindness out of his eyes as a lion might shake his mane. A silvery laugh cut through his dizziness, and his sight cleared slowly. There was a strangeness about all the landscape that he could not place or define, an unfamiliar tinge to earth and sky. But he did not think long of this. Before him, swaying like a sapling in the wind, stood a woman. Her body was like ivory, and save for a veil of gossamer, she was naked as the day. Her slender bare feet were whiter than the snow they spurned. She laughed, and her laughter was sweeter than the rippling of silvery fountains, and poisonous with cruel mockery. "Who are you?" demanded the warrior. "What matter?" Her voice was more musical than a silver-stringed harp, but it was edged with cruelty. "Call up your men," he growled, grasping his sword. "Though my strength fail me, yet they shall not take me alive. I see that you are of the Vanir." "Have I said so?" He looked again at her unruly locks, which he had thought to be red. Now he saw that they were neither red nor yellow, but a glorious compound of both colors. He gazed spellbound. Her hair was like elfin gold, striking which the sun dazzled him. Her eyes were neither wholly blue nor wholly gray, but of shifting colors and dancing lights and clouds of colors he could not recognize. Her full red lips smiled, and from her slim feet to the blinding crown of her billowy hair, her ivory body was as perfect as the dream of a god. Amra's pulse hammered in his temples. "I cannot tell," said he, "whether you are of Vanaheim and mine enemy, or of Asgard and my friend. Far have I wandered, from Zingara to the Sea of Vililet, in Stygia and Kush, and the country of the Hyrcanians. But a woman like you I have never seen. Your locks blind me with their brightness. Not even among the fairest daughters of the Aesir have I seen such hair. By Ymir." "Who are you to swear by Ymir?" she mocked. "What know you of the gods of ice and snow, you who have come up from the south to adventure among strangers?" "By the dark gods of my own race," he cried in anger. "Have I been backward in the swordplay, stranger or no? This day I have seen 80 warriors fall, and I alone survived the field where Mulfhere's reavers met the men of Bragi. Tell me, woman, have you caught the flash of mail across the snow plains, or seen armed men moving upon the ice?" "I have seen the hoarfrost glittering in the sun," she answered. "I have heard the wind whispering across the everlasting snows." He shook his head. "Niord should have come up with us before the battle joined. I fear he and his warriors have been ambushed. Wulfhere lies dead with all his weapon men. I had thought there was no village within many leagues of this spot, for the war carried us far. But you can have come no great distance over these snows, naked as you are. Lead me to your tribe if you are of Asgard, for I am faint with the weariness of strife." "My dwelling place is further than you can walk, Amra of Akbatana," she laughed. Spreading wide her arms, she swayed before him, her golden head lolling wantonly, her scintillant eyes shadowed beneath long, silken lashes. "Am I not beautiful, man?" "Like dawn running naked on the snows," he muttered, his eyes burning like those of a wolf. "Then why do you not rise and follow me? Who is the strong warrior who falls down before me?" she chanted in maddening mockery. "Lie down and die in the snow with the other fools, Amra of the black hair. You cannot follow where I would lead." With an oath the man heaved himself upon his feet, his blue eyes blazing, his dark scarred face convulsed. Rage shook his soul, but desire for the taunting figure before him hammered at his temples and drove his wild blood riotously through his veins. Passion fierce as physical agony flooded his whole being, so that earth and sky swam red to his dizzy gaze, and weariness and faintness were swept from him in madness. He spoke no word as he drove at her fingers hooked like talons. With a shriek of laughter, she leaped back and ran, laughing at him over her white shoulder. With a low growl, Amra followed. He had forgotten the fight, forgotten the mailed warriors who lay in their blood, forgotten Niord's belated reavers. He had thought only for the slender white shape which seemed to float rather than run before him. Out across the white blinding plain she led him. The trampled red field fell out of sight behind him, but still Amra kept on with the silent tenacity of his race. His mailed feet broke through the frozen crust. He sank deep in the drifts and forged through them by sheer strength. But the girl danced across the snow as light as a feather floating across a pool. Her naked feet scarcely left their imprint on the hoarfrost. In spite of the fire in his veins, the cold bit through the warrior's mail and furs, but the girl in her gossamer veil ran as lightly and as gaily as if she danced through the palms and rose gardens of Poitain. Black curses drooled through the warrior's parched lips. The great veins swelled and throbbed in his temples, and his teeth gnashed spasmodically. "You cannot escape me," he roared. "Lead me into a trap and I'll pile the heads of your kinsmen at your feet. Hide from me and I'll tear apart the mountains to find you. I'll follow you to hell and beyond hell." Her maddening laughter floated back to him, and foam flew from the warrior's lips. Further and further into the wastes she led him, till he saw the wide plains give way to low hills, marching upward in broken ranges. Far to the north he caught a glimpse of towering mountains, blue with the distance, or white with the eternal snows. Above these mountains shone the flaring rays of the borealis. They spread fanwise into the sky, frosty blades of cold flaming light, changing in color, growing and brightening. Above him the skies glowed and crackled with strange lights and gleams. The snow shone weirdly, now frosty blue, now icy crimson, now cold silver. Through a shimmering icy realm of enchantment, Amra plunged doggedly onward, in a crystalline maze where the only reality was the white body dancing across the glittering snow beyond his reach, ever beyond his reach. Yet he did not wonder at the necromantic strangeness of it all, not even when two gigantic figures rose up to bar his way. The scales of their mail were white with hoarfrost, their helmets and their axes were sheathed in ice. Snow sprinkled their locks, in their beards were spikes of icicles, their eyes were cold as the lights that streamed above them. "Brothers," cried the girl, dancing between them, "look who follows. I have brought you a man for the feasting. Take his heart that we may lay it smoking on our father's board." The giants answered with roars like the grinding of icebergs on a frozen shore, and heaved up their shining axes as the maddened Akbatanin hurled himself upon them. A frosty blade flashed before his eyes, blinding him with its brightness, and he gave back a terrible stroke that sheared through his foe's thigh. With a groan the victim fell, and at the instant Amra was dashed into the snow, his left shoulder numb from the blow of the survivor, from which the warrior's mail had barely saved his life. Amra saw the remaining giant looming above him like a colossus carved of ice, etched against the glowing sky. The axe fell, to sink through the snow and deep into the frozen earth as Amra hurled himself aside and leaped to his feet. The giant roared and wrenched the axe head free, but even as he did so, Amra's sword sang down. The giant's knees bent, and he sank slowly into the snow, which turned crimson with the blood that gushed from his half-severed neck. Amra wheeled to see the girl standing a short distance away, staring in wide-eyed horror, all mockery gone from her face. He cried out fiercely, and the blood drops flew from his sword as his hand shook in the intensity of his passion. "Call the rest of your brothers," he roared. "Call the dogs, I'll give their hearts to the wolves." With a cry of fright, she turned and fled. She did not laugh now, nor mock him over her shoulder. She ran as for her life, and though he strained every nerve and thew, until his temples were like to burst and the snow swam red to his gaze, she drew away from him, dwindling in the witch-fire of the skies, until she was a figure no bigger than a child, then a dancing white flame on the snow, then a dim blur in the distance. But grinding his teeth until the blood started from his gums, he reeled on, and he saw the blur grow to a dancing white flame. And then she was running less than 100 paces ahead of him, and slowly the space narrowed foot by foot. She was running with effort now, her golden locks blowing free. He heard the quick panting of her breath and saw a flash of fear in the look she cast over her alabaster shoulder. The grim endurance of the warrior had served him well. The speed ebbed from her flashing white legs. She reeled in her gait. In his untamed soul flamed up the fires of hell she had fanned so well. With an inhuman roar he closed in on her, just as she wheeled with a haunting cry, and flung out her arms to fend him off. His sword fell into the snow as he crushed her to him. Her supple body bent backwards as she fought with desperate frenzy in his iron arms. Her golden hair blew about his face, blinding him with its sheen. The feel of her slender figure twisting in his mailed arms drove him to blinder madness. His strong fingers sank deep into her smooth flesh, and that flesh was cold as ice. It was as if he embraced not a woman of human flesh and blood, but a woman of flaming ice. She writhed her golden head aside, striving to avoid the savage kisses that bruised her red lips. "You are cold as the snows," he mumbled dazedly. "I will warm you with the fire in my own blood." With a desperate wrench, she twisted from his arms, leaving her single gossamer garment in his grasp. She sprang back and faced him, her golden locks in wild disarray, her white bosom heaving, her beautiful eyes blazing with terror. For an instant he stood frozen, awed by her terrible beauty as she posed naked against the snows. And in that instant she flung her arms toward the lights that glowed in the skies above her, and cried out in a voice that rang in Amra's ears forever after, "Ymir, O my father, save me!" Amra was leaping forward, arms spread to seize her, when with a crack like the breaking of an ice mountain, the whole skies leaped into icy fire. The girl's ivory body was suddenly enveloped in a cold blue flame so blinding that the warrior threw up his hands to shield his eyes. A fleeting instant, skies and snowy hills were bathed in crackling white flames, blue darts of icy light, and frozen crimson fires. Then Amra staggered and cried out. The girl was gone. The glowing snow lay empty and bare. High above him the witch-lights flashed and played in a frosty sky gone mad, and among the distant blue mountains there sounded a rolling thunder as of a gigantic war chariot rushing behind steeds, whose frantic hooves struck lightning from the snows and echoes from the skies. Then suddenly the borealis, the snowy hills, and the blazing heavens reeled drunkenly to Amra's sight. Thousands of fireballs burst with showers of sparks, and the sky itself became a titanic wheel which rained stars as it spun. Under his feet the snowy hills heaved up like a wave, and the Akbatanan crumbled into the snows to lie motionless. In a cold, dark universe whose sun was extinguished eons ago, Amra felt the movement of life, alien and unguessed. An earthquake had him in its grip and was shaking him to and fro, at the same time chafing his hands and feet until he yelled in pain and fury and groped for his sword. "He's coming to, Horsa," grunted a voice. "Haste, we must rub the frost out from his limbs if he's ever to wield sword again." "He won't open his left hand," growled another, his voice indicating muscular strain. "He's clutching something." Amra opened his eyes and stared into the bearded faces that bent over him. He was surrounded by tall, golden-haired warriors in mail and furs. "Amra, you live!" "By Crom Niord," gasped he. "Am I alive? Or are we all dead and in Valhalla?" "We live," grunted the Aesir, busy over Amra's half-frozen feet. "We had to fight our way through an ambush, else we had come up with you before the battle was joined. The corpses were scarce cold when we came upon the field. We did not find you among the dead, so we followed your spoor. In Ymir's name, Amra, why did you wander off into the wastes of the north? We have followed your tracks in the snow for hours. Had a blizzard come up and hidden them, we'd had never found you, by Ymir." "Swear not so much by Ymir," muttered a warrior, glancing at the distant mountains. "This is his land, and the god bides among yonder mountains, the legends say." "I followed a woman," Amra answered hazily. "We met Bragi's men in the plains. I know not how long we fought. I alone lived. I was dizzy and faint. The land lay like a dream before me. Only now do all things seem natural and familiar. The woman came and taunted me. She was beautiful as a frozen flame from hell. When I looked at her, I was as one mad, and forgot all else in the world. I followed her. Did you not find her tracks, or the giants in icy mail I slew?" Niord shook his head. "We found only your tracks in the snow, Amra." "Then it may be I was mad," said Amra dazedly. "Yet you yourself are no more real to me than was the golden-haired witch who fled naked across the snows before me. Yet from my very hand she vanished in icy flame." "He is delirious," whispered a warrior. "Not so," cried an older man whose eyes were wild and weird. "It was Atali, the daughter of Ymir the frost giant. To the fields of the dead she comes and shows herself to the dying. Myself, when a boy, I saw her, when I lay half slain on the bloody field of Woolraven. I saw her walk among the dead in the snows, her naked body gleaming like ivory, and her golden hair like a blinding flame in the moonlight. I lay and howled like a dying dog because I could not crawl after her. She lures men from stricken fields into the wastelands, to be slain by her brothers, the ice giants, who lay men's red hearts smoking on Ymir's board. Amra has seen Atali, the frost giant's daughter." "Bah!" grunted Horsa. "Old Gorm's mind was turned in his youth by a sword cut on the head. Amra was delirious with the fury of battle. Look how his helmet is dinted. Any of those blows might have addled his brain. It was a hallucination he followed into the wastes. He is from the south. What does he know of Atali?" "You speak truth, perhaps," muttered Amra. "It was all strange and weird. By Crom." He broke off, glaring at the object that still dangled from his clenched left fist. The others gaped silently at the veil he held up. A wisp of gossamer that was never spun by human distaff. The end. As long as midnight cloaks the earth with shadows grim and stark, God save us from the Judas kiss of a dead man in the dark. Old Adam Farrell lay dead in the house wherein he had lived alone for the last 20 years. A silent, churlish recluse, in his life he had known no friends, and only 2 men had watched his passing. Dr. Stein rose and glanced out the window into the gathering dusk. "You think you can spend the night here, then?" he asked his companion. This man, Falred by name, assented. "Rather a useless and primitive custom, sitting up with the dead," commented the doctor, preparing to depart. "But I suppose, in common decency, we will have to bow to precedents. Maybe I can find someone who will come over here and help you with your vigil." Falred shrugged his shoulders. "I doubt it. Farrell wasn't liked and wasn't known by many people. I scarcely knew him myself, but I don't mind sitting up with the corpse." Dr. Stein was removing his rubber gloves, and Falred watched the process with an interest that almost amounted to fascination. A slight involuntary shudder shook him at the memory of touching these gloves. Slick, cold, clammy things, like the touch of death. "You may get lonely tonight if I don't find anyone," the doctor remarked as he opened the door. "Not superstitious, are you?" Falred laughed. "Scarcely. To tell the truth, from what I hear of Farrell's disposition, I'd rather be watching his corpse than have been his guest in life." The door closed, and Falred took up his vigil. He seated himself in the only chair the room boasted, glanced casually at the formless, sheeted bulk on the bed opposite him, and began to read by the light of the dim lamp which stood on the rough table. Outside, the darkness gathered swiftly, and finally Falred laid down his magazine to rest his eyes. He looked again at the shape which had, in life, been the form of Adam Farrell, wondering what quirk in the human nature made the sight of a corpse not only so unpleasant, but such an object of fear to many. Unthinking ignorance, seeing in dead things a reminder of death to come, he decided lazily, and began idly contemplating as to what life had held for this grim and crabbed old man, who had neither relatives nor friends, and who had seldom left the house wherein he had died. The usual tales of miser-hoarded wealth had accumulated, but Falred felt so little interest in the whole matter that it was not even necessary for him to overcome any temptation to pry about the house for possible hidden treasure. He returned to his reading with a shrug. The task was more boresome than he had thought for. After a while, he was aware that every time he looked up from his magazine, his eyes fell upon the bed with its grim occupant. He stared involuntarily as if he had, for an instant, forgotten the presence of the dead man, and was unpleasantly reminded of the fact. The start was slight and instinctive, but he felt almost angered at himself. He realized, for the first time, the utter and deadening silence which enwrapped the house, a silence apparently shared by the night, for no sound came through the window. Adam Farrell had lived as far apart from his neighbors as possible, and there was no other house within hearing distance. Falred shook himself as if to rid his mind of unsavory speculations, and went back to his reading. A sudden vagrant gust of wind whipped through the window, in which the light in the lamp flickered and went out suddenly. Falred, cursing softly, groped in the darkness for matches, burning his fingers on the hot lamp chimney. He struck a match, relighted the lamp, and glancing over at the bed, got a horrible mental jolt. Adam Farrell's face stared blindly at him, the dead eyes wide and blank, framed in the gnarled gray features. Even as Falred instinctively shuddered, his reason explained the apparent phenomenon. The sheet that covered the corpse had been carelessly thrown about the face, and the sudden puff of wind had disarranged and flung it aside. Yet there was something grisly about the thing, something fearsomely suggestive, as if, in the cloaking dark, a dead hand had flung aside the sheet, just as if the corpse were about to rise. Falred, an imaginative man, shrugged his shoulders at these ghastly thoughts and crossed the room to replace the sheet. The dead eyes seemed to stare at him malevolently, with an evilness that transcended the dead man's churlishness in life. The workings of a vivid imagination, Falred knew, and he recovered the gray face, shrinking as his hand chanced to touch the cold flesh. Slick and clammy, the touch of death. He shuddered with the natural revulsion of the living for the dead, and went back to his chair and magazine. At last, growing sleepy, he lay down upon a couch which, by some strange whim of the original owner, formed part of the room's scant furnishings, and composed himself for slumber. He decided to leave the light burning, telling himself that it was in accordance with the usual custom of leaving lights burning for the dead, for he was not willing to admit to himself that already he was conscious of a dislike for lying in darkness with the corpse. He dozed, awoke with a start, and looked at the sheeted form on the bed. Silence reigned over the house, and outside it was very dark. The hour was approaching midnight, with its accompanying eerie domination over the human mind. Falred glanced again at the bed where the body lay, and found the sight of the sheeted object most repellent. A fantastic idea had birth in his mind and grew, that beneath the sheet, the mere lifeless body had become a strange, monstrous thing, a hideous, conscious being that watched him with eyes which burned through the fabric of the cloth. This thought, a mere fantasy, of course, he explained to himself by the legends of vampires, undead, ghosts, and such like, the fearsome attributes with which the living have cloaked the dead for countless ages. Since primitive man first recognized in death something horrid and apart from life. Man feared death, thought Falred, and some of his fear of death took hold on the dead so that they, too, were feared. And the sight of the dead engendered grisly thoughts, gave rise to dim fears of hereditary memory, lurking back in the dark corners of the brain. At any rate, that silent, hidden thing was getting on his nerves. He thought of uncovering the face, on the principle that familiarity breeds contempt. The sight of the features, calm and still in death, would banish, he thought, all such wild conjectures as were haunting him in spite of himself. But the thought of those dead eyes staring in the lamplight was intolerable, so at last he blew out the light and lay down, This fear had been stealing upon him so insidiously and gradually that he had not been aware of its growth. With the extinguishing of the light, however, and the blotting out of the sight of the corpse, things assumed their true character and proportions, and Falred fell asleep almost instantly, on his lips a faint smile for his previous folly. He awakened suddenly. How long he had been asleep he did not know. He sat up, his pulse pounding frantically, the cold sweat beading his forehead. He knew instantly where he was, remembered the other occupant of the room. But what had awakened him? A dream. Yes, now he remembered. A hideous dream in which the dead man had risen from the bed and stalked stiffly across the room with eyes of fire and a horrid leer frozen on his gray lips. Falred had seemed to lie motionless, helpless. Then as the corpse reached a gnarled and horrible hand, he had awakened. He strove to pierce the gloom, but the room was all blackness, and all without was so dark that no gleam of light came through the window. He reached a shaking hand toward the lamp, then recoiled as if from a hidden serpent. Sitting here in the dark with a fiendish corpse was bad enough, but he dared not light the lamp, for fear that his reason would be snuffed out like a candle at what he might see. Horror, stark and unreasoning, had full possession of his soul. He no longer questioned the instinctive fears that rose in him. All those legends he had heard came back to him and brought a belief in them. Death was a hideous thing, a brain-shattering horror, imbuing lifeless men with a horrid malevolence. Adam Farrell in his life had been simply a churlish but harmless man. Now he was a terror, a monster, a fiend lurking in the shadows of fear, ready to leap on mankind with talons dipped deep in death and insanity. Falred sat there, his blood freezing, and fought out his silent battle. Faint glimmerings of reason had begun to touch his fright when a soft, stealthy sound again froze him. He did not recognize it as the whisper of the night wind across the windowsill. His frenzied fancy knew it only as the tread of death and horror. He sprang from the couch, then stood undecided. Escape was in his mind, but he was too dazed to even try to formulate a plan of escape. Even his sense of direction was gone. Fear had so stultified his mind that he was not able to think consciously. The blackness spread in long waves about him, and its darkness and void entered into his brain. His motions, such as they were instinctive. He seemed shackled with mighty chains, and his limbs responded sluggishly, like an imbecile's. A terrible horror grew up in him and reared its grisly shape, that the dead man was behind him, was stealing upon him from the rear. He no longer thought of lighting the lamp. He no longer thought of anything. Fear filled his whole being. There was room for nothing else. He backed slowly away in the darkness, hands behind him, instinctively feeling the way. With a terrific effort, he partly shook the clinging mists of horror from him, and the cold sweat clammy upon his body strove to orient himself. He could see nothing, but the bed was across the room in front of him. He was backing away from it. There was where the dead man was lying, according to all rules of nature. If the thing were as he felt behind him, then the old tales were true. Death did implant in lifeless bodies an unearthly animation, and dead men did roam the shadows to work their ghastly and evil will upon the sons of men. Then, great God, what was man but a wailing infant, lost in the night and beset by frightful things from the black abysses and the terrible unknown voids of space and time? These conclusions he did not reach by any reasoning process. They leaped full-grown into his terror-dazed brain. He worked his way slowly backward, groping, clinging to the thought that the dead man must be in front of him. Then his back-flung hands encountered something slick, cold, and clammy, like the touch of death. A scream shook the echoes, followed by the crash of a falling body. The next morning, they who came to the house of death found 2 corpses in the room. Adam Farrell's sheeted body lay motionless upon the bed, and across the room lay the body of Falred, beneath the shelf where Dr. Stein had absent-mindedly left his gloves. Rubber gloves, slick and clammy to the touch of a hand groping in the dark. A hand of one fleeing his own fear. Rubber gloves, slick and clammy and cold, like the touch of death. The end.